Well, what is up, Smells Like Smoke podcast? My name is Trevor DeVage, and I'm your host for this podcast where we talk about what does it mean to rescue others by snatching them out of the flames of judgment. Jude 23, my life verse, one of my favorite verses in all of the Bible, my reminder each and every day that I'm on a rescue mission to help people find hope, transformation, and redemption. And we're here on this podcast to help you do just that. So if you've not been with us, I would encourage you go back, listen to the other 16 episodes prior to this one. This was a brand new season, brand new format, brand new look and feel, brand new name to this podcast. Used to be called The Make, now called Smells Like Smoke. And I want to let you in, all the listeners, on a little something. Over the last couple years, I've been mulling over and thinking through this very thought of smells like smoke. What does it look like for us to smell like smoke? When somebody looks at you and they go, man, I don't know what it is about you, but man, your life smells like smoke. All these thoughts, all these podcasts, all these sermons, all these scriptures have led me to do something that I'm really kind of leery to talk about, but at the same time, I'm really excited. I've been working on my very first book called Smells Like Smoke. And it's going to be a conglomeration of stories and basically a guide on how do we as the church, do we as Christ followers actually get close enough to hell to rescue people from it. And so with that said, you'll be hearing a lot more in the months to come, but the manuscript is done. It's getting ready to go through its final edits, and then we are going to see what God does with this. But if you're interested, let me know. And when we get ready for pre-orders, I will give you links and websites and all those things, and hopefully you'll join the Smells Like Smoke team. I've got all sorts of ideas, developing small group material right now for it. So as we keep going on that, we will talk more about that. But today, I want to start with something that doesn't get said enough. And it's just simply this: following Jesus will cost you something. Let me say it again. Following Jesus will cost you something. Not everything, not always the same thing, but always something. And if you're not honest about that up front, you'll eventually resent the very thing that you and I were called to. And so today we're talking about what happens when you understand that the ministry of Jesus will cost you. I'm not talking about just paid ministry. I'm talking about the ministry that all of us are called to. It's going to cost you. It's going to cost you family. It's going to cost you time. It's going to cost you energy. It's going to cost you comfort. It's going to cost you control. Not because God is cruel. Let me be clear. It's not because God is cruel, but because obedience always carries a price tag. And people need to understand ahead of time what they're willing to give. So why does this matter? Well, I'm glad you asked that. This matters because a lot of people feel blindsided by sacrifice. Like you and I, we signed up for purpose, but we didn't expect the cost. Like we like purpose. Sometimes we just don't like the cost that comes with purpose. Maybe you wanted meaning, but you were not prepared for loss. So when obedience starts costing time with family, margin in our schedules, emotional energy, or personal comfort, here's what happens. Confusion sets in. And you start to say things like, did I do something wrong? Is this really what God wants, right? You ever been there? Or why does this feel so hard? I remember my first couple of years in ministry, I came out wide-eyed and ready to change the world. And then I ran smack dab into really hard issues and really opinionated people and people that I thought wanted to change the world, but really they just wanted to keep their comfort. I began to ask God, is this what you really want? What am I supposed to do with this? Why does this feel so hard? See, those questions are normal, but avoiding those questions leads to bitterness. And in the church, a lot of times we don't deal with these. And so instead of being on a rescue mission, we are on a retreat mission. We retreat from what we once knew. And here's what I know about bitter men. They don't finish well. So let's talk about obedience without illusions. Let's clear something up. Jesus never bait and switched anyone. Not in any of his time on earth. He did not hide the cost. In fact, Jesus named the cost. He talked about crosses, not convenience. And he talked about loss before gain. Talked about sacrifice before reward. See, the problem is not that obedience costs us. That's not the problem. The problem is that we often expect it not to. Which I don't know how we expect this, because if you've ever read scripture, it tells you quite the opposite. So when expectations are unrealistic, obedience, you know what it feels like? It feels unfair. So there's this whole thing of family and time and sacrifice. See, that's where the cost shows up most clearly. Like, first and foremost, your family. Like, ministry costs time, and time is finite. And that tension is really real. And I know for men especially, we feel it when we miss the moments, when schedules stretch, when energies run low, and if we're not careful, sacrifice becomes imbalance. So here's what matters. God does not call you to sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry, but he does call you to sacrifice comfort, convenience, and control. Those are very different things. See, wise men learn the difference. So when time feels tight, what do? Because time is the currency most men feel first. There are more needs than hours, aren't there? More opportunities than capacity. And at some point, you have to choose what gets your yes, what gets your no. And if you don't decide intentionally, everything decides for you. There's a great little book that I read years ago by Pastor Andy Stanley. It's called Choosing to Cheat. And he says, everywhere, every decision you make, you're choosing to cheat someone or something. Which side are you going to cheat? And that's how burnout begins, is when we don't understand which way to choose. See, counting the costs is not about giving everything. It's about giving the right things. So I sit with men here in Tucson all the time. That's where we live, in Tucson. If you're listening to this somewhere else, we're down here in the middle of the mountains and in the middle of the desert. And I've talked with guys in our city who have stepped into ministry, stepped into leadership, or some kind of service with good intentions. They want purpose. They want to make a difference. They want to help people. And slowly, here's what happens. The cost increased. Late nights, heavy conversations, emotional weight. And no one told them how to carry it. They thought something was wrong with them because it felt heavy. Here's what you need to understand. Nothing was wrong. They were just experiencing the cost of obedience. But I think we need to count the cost before we pay the cost. Jesus said something that often gets overlooked, that before building a tower, count the cost. Before going to war, assess what it will require. See, that's wisdom. Counting the cost does not mean backing out. It means going in with eyes open. And honestly, men who do not count the cost, they get angry when the bill comes due. Men who count the cost pay it with clarity, not without knowing. So how do we do this sacrifice without bitterness? Because that's the danger. Unexamined sacrifice leads to resentment. Let me say that again. Unexamined sacrifice will lead you and lead me to resentment. You give, and one day you realize you're angry. Not at God, at people. See, that's a warning sign. God does not want resentful servants. He wants willing servants. Sacrifice that is freely chosen sustains joy. Sacrifice that is assumed destroys it. Let's say that again. Sacrifice that is freely chosen sustains joy. Sacrifice that is assumed destroys your joy. So what does God actually ask for? Well, let me say this clearly. God does not ask for everything at once. He asks for obedience one step at a time. I tell people all the time when they come in to meet with me about big things in life and decisions to do this, decisions to do that, I always say, because of this verse, just take the one next right step. Not 10, not 20, just one next right step. And sometimes that step costs comfort. Sometimes it costs reputation. Sometimes it costs ease. But God never will waste your sacrifice. What you give in obedience, he redeems in ways that you cannot predict. So what happens when obedience costs relationships? Because sometimes that's the cost. Sometimes that's what it means. Not because you're arrogant, not because you're cruel, but because not everyone will understand your yes. I've had a lot of those moments in life, and they hurt. See, we often, especially us men, we want to be understood by everyone, but obedience requires clarity more than approval. You can love people deeply and still walk a different path. See, that tension is real. And if you look at Jesus, Jesus understood costly obedience. He lost followers. He lost reputation. He lost comfort. I think of John 6. I think it's verse 66. Like it says, all these believers have abandoned Jesus because his teaching is so hard for them to live out. And he looks at the 12 and he says, are you going to leave me too? And I like their response. They're like, where would we go? We've given our life for this. We believe in this. Now, Jesus, it ultimately cost him his life. Not because he miscalculated, but because he understood the cost. And he considered you and I both worth it. See, that changes how we view sacrifice. If Jesus paid the ultimate cost for you, your obedience is never one-sided. So let's get practical. Like, what if we decide what we're willing to give? I think that's where it has to start. In the practicality, here are 3 questions I think every person needs to answer honestly. Here's the first one. What am I willing to give for obedience? What am I willing to give for obedience? In fact, maybe you want to write these down or put them in the notes on your phone. So maybe pause this and write that one down. What am I willing to give for obedience? Let's start there. Here's the second one. What am I not willing to sacrifice? I think you need to answer that too. I had a guy that I worked with years ago, and we were both in ministry, and he was ready to go lead a church. And he said, but I will not go here, 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 or here. And I realized what his willingness to sacrifice was. There was still a level of comfort of where he would go and where he wouldn't go. And my question was, what if God asks you to go to one of those places? Will you be obedient, and will you sacrifice? You know what he said? No. So what am I not willing to sacrifice? What am I willing to give for obedience? Here's the third question. What needs boundaries so obedience stays healthy? Doesn't mean you have to go 24/7, 365 with no breaks and neglect everything in your life. So what boundaries do you need to set so your obedience stays healthy? One of the things I love about our church is they give me a yearly sabbatical. The month of June, I get to spend time with my family. The other 11 months, we run really, really, really hard. And it's good. We're obedient to it. We're seeing life change and people's lives move. But the month of June, our board here looked at me coming in the door and they said, hey, we give you the month of June to recharge, replenish, and spend some time with your family because we know the cost. See, I think you have to answer those questions because those answers to those questions matter. They protect your family, they protect your soul, they protect your calling. See, sacrifice without boundaries leads to burnout. Let's repeat that. Sacrifice without boundaries leads to burnout. And boundaries without sacrifice, they lead to apathy. See, wisdom holds both. So let me give a word to those of you in ministry. And I'm not talking paid. If you're paid, that's great. But if you're serving, leading, or rescuing people regularly, this is a podcast all about rescuing people. I need you to hear this. You are allowed to feel the cost. You're allowed to name it. You're allowed to pace yourself. Feeling the weight does not mean you are weak. It means you care. Just don't carry it alone. I think a few months ago, I was sitting with our team. And on a weekly basis, if you preach here at our church, if you speak from our platform, you will do it 5 times. You will do it on Tuesday, Thursday night, and 3 times on Sunday. And we figured that up. And last year, just preaching alone, I think I was on stage 170 times, something like that. And that doesn't include anything I do with our staff, anything I do with our in our city or other places. And I remember our team and a couple of our board members looked at me and said, hey, we want you here for 30 years, not for 30 minutes. We've got to figure out how to pace you. Now, everything inside of me is like, why? I love what I do. But they were right. And some people are like, yeah, but man, if you're not there, if I'm not there, the church is just fine. I've had people in my church say, well, I don't like it when you're not here. That's very kind of you. That doesn't matter to me. I want you to know that Jesus is here. And we're not going to carry it alone. So let me give a word to those of you considering obedience. If you're on the edge of a decision of obedience, I need you to hear this. Don't let fear decide for you. But don't romanticize the cost either. Ask God for clarity. Count the cost and move forward with peace. Obedience with clarity produces endurance. Obedience with clarity produces endurance. So what's the hope in the cost? Here's the hope. God never asked for something without giving something greater in return. It's not always immediately. It's not always obviously, but faithfully. See, sacrifice shapes you. Obedience forms you. Cost refines you. Let me give you the progression. Sacrifice shapes you. Obedience forms you. Cost refines you. And what God builds in you through obedience lasts longer than what comfort ever could. So let me give you a closing challenge. Here's this week's. I want you to sit down and count the cost, not emotionally, practically. What are you saying yes to? What is it costing? What boundaries do you need to put in place to be on this rescue mission? And then decide what you're willing to give before resentment decides for you. Because obedience has a price tag. And it's worth paying with clarity. But if you're going to rescue people, you got to count the cost of the rescue mission. Because it will cost you. It might cost you friends. It might cost you status. It might cost a job. But you got to count the cost. See, this smells like smoke. And we're learning that commitment is not cheap. But if you're going to rescue people, it's worth it. And so next episode, we're going to talk about staying soft in a hard world and why being hard-hearted has to stop. And we can't be hardened in the heart and rescue people. So again, if you like this podcast, do me a favor. Would you like it? Would you share it? Maybe leave some comments. If you got some questions, ask your questions. But do me a favor this week. Stay honest, stay obedient, and stay close to the fire. We'll see you right back here next week.